Lauren Nunn is on my team. She's a senior implementation consultant and probably one of the most extraordinary problem solvers I've encountered in a very long time. I wish you could see her when she's at her desk toiling and trying to figure out problems that she's encountering with customer configurations and so forth. She's an admitted workflow junkie. She loves this stuff. She loves to see point A to point B shrink in size so that people can get on with their day and do more important things. And I couldn't be more proud than to introduce Lauren Nunn to the stage. So Lauren, come on up.
Oh, I get music too? Okay. Hi, everybody. Hopefully you're not too sleepy from your lunch break. Stay with me during this presentation. But I'm so happy to be up here. And as Mark said, we're jumping more into the configuration side of things and talking about actually diving into the tools. So it's going to get a little configuration heavy as we go through this, so stick with me. But I think it's going to be really great because a lot of the basic practices that many of our speakers have talked to us about over the last day and a half really do start to apply once we get into the system. So first things first, we got to talk about business process automation in general before we talk about Central Desktop. Those principles are going to apply to the tools that we need to use. I'll, of course, talk to you about the Central Desktop tools. Couldn't leave the stage without doing that. We're going to need to take some time to evaluate your current process and talk about what that looks like to break it down. Frankly, we're going to spend most of our time here, in a good section of it, just making sure that you understand how to apply the tools to your process. So my father is a professional athlete, or was, and I learned most of my life lessons as a child through sports analogies. So I'm sure Rob will appreciate this. I'll give you one now that I try to live by on a daily basis, and that is that game day should be the easiest day of the week. Practice is the hard part. So in that spirit, I hope to coach you today to break down your process so that game day, or the setup of the system, is the easiest part of this. Finally, we'll take a look at a use case and actually automate something in Central Desktop. I'll show you what that setup looks like, and then we'll wrap it up with questions. Okay, so the good, the bad, and the ugly is not only a Clint Eastwood film, but a commonly used phrase. And I hate to be that person to stand up here and say, if you Google it, this is what it tells you. But I will tell you that when I Googled that, I learned that this movie is considered a spaghetti Western, which I had never heard that before, but also an Italian Western. So I figured I'd just share that with you. I'm going to use that phrase, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to help us talk about business process automation in general. Through Central Desktop, our hope is that we're getting these three things out of business process automation: increased productivity, shorter cycle times, and consistency. And I don't think I have to argue with you on any of these points. These are all things we want. We want our work out the door faster. We want to make sure that people are being efficient and creative and thinking critically. And we want that consistency to make sure that we can report on things. The real benefit here, however, is the visibility and control of business processes that are achieved. So if I can create a task list template and drop it into a system at the time of creation, I've already created a baseline for reporting, because the same tasks are in there all the time, and I've taken an element of busy work off my team's plate so they can start being creative right away. It's not all good. Process automation can be bad, so we need to think about that a little bit. We always need to ask ourselves this question: how much is too much? The tools that we buy and that we use every day are supposed to complement our team's work, not do the work for us. They're only tools. So the best way for me to describe this is to have you picture a Rube Goldberg machine. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, these machines are devices or apparatuses that are created to intentionally over-engineer a simple task. If you'll indulge me for a moment, I'm going to go ahead and actually describe one to you. If you're a visual person, want to close your eyes, totally fine. So there's a guy who sits down at a table to eat a bowl of soup. And we've invented a machine that is the self-operating napkin. As he raises the soup spoon to his mouth, a string attached to that jerks a ladle, which contains a cracker. That cracker flies into the air just out of reach of a parrot perched up above. This parrot loves crackers. So he jumps off his perch to try and reach that cracker, and in doing so, upsets a bowl of seed on the other side. That extra seed falls into a bucket, pulls on another string, which opens an automated lighter. That lighter lights a fuse, which sets off a rocket, which then pulls on another string, which releases a pocket knife that finally cuts a string attached to a pendulum that has a napkin on it that swings to wipe the man's mouth. We're not making Rube Goldberg machines. The efficient way to do that would be to decide when you need the napkin, pick it up, and wipe your own mouth. Trying to figure out how to build a machine that's going to do that for you is an exercise in insanity, not productivity. So this would be the part of the Clint Eastwood movie where I tell you he rides off into the sunset and the good and the bad aren't ugly, but in fact, all of this can work together beautifully if it's done right. I love this quote. If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. We have to figure out what it is we need to do. What are the parts that we actually need to automate? And what are the parts that we leave to our teams to make sure that they can touch the process, help the process along? Always remember that systems are meant to be uniform, but people are meant to be agile. When we do this, we open the door to innovation. If I take that busy work off my team's plate, they now have time to sit and critically think, creatively think. Maybe they shut the door for a minute, like our last speaker was talking about, and they can actually work through some of these problems. As Mark mentioned, that's one of my favorite things to do, so I definitely advocate for this. So what does that all mean? Stop talking to me about all of this, Lauren. I don't care about Clint Eastwood. I want to know how to do it. So what if you could mass update and assign tasks in the system? What if you could kick off a workspace and drop in a task list automatically? What if that task list was a standardized, repeatable process that made sure your team didn't miss steps or get confused? What if when you opened a workspace, you didn't have to put all of your tasks in there at once, but rather we could kick them off as we moved through the project? And then finally, what if I could automate that file approval process that has to go through 6 or 7 people and consequently dozens of emails? We can do that, and we're going to do that. All of the tools listed below here are the things that I'm going to focus on in the presentation today. I want to show you how roles, task lists, workspace properties, and the workflow engine work together to make this happen. Okay, so we have 5 different tools within the central desktop system that are going to do this for us. And they're going to answer 3 key questions. And I'm going to say these 3 questions multiple times, so I apologize ahead of time. It's the who, the what, and the how. So the first one here, roles, that fulfills the who area. These are the people that are completing the work. I'm going to show you what a role is, and I'm going to set it up in the system. Task list templates, workspace properties, and on my next slide, workspace templates all fulfill that what area. Task list templates are the steps that need to be completed. Workspace properties are the details of the project. What do I need to report on? What do I need to know about this project? And on top of that, workspace properties end up triggering a lot of our workflow rules. The last part of that, what factor, is the workspace template. So this is the actual project. And then finally, workflow. This is the engine that drives everything forward, the reason why you're all sitting in this seat. So how do I do this? First, we need to evaluate our process, just like I mentioned at the beginning. Same 3 questions. Who's doing the work? What are they working on? And how do they get it done? So I'm going to take a second. I'm going to go through this kind of slowly because I want you each to pick a process in your mind. Think of something that gets done in your office every day, whether it's by you, by your team, by the team down the hall that you really wish would do this project faster. Think about who's doing the work. And as an example of that, I'll give you 2. What if it's an HR team? That's the who. They're interviewing for 3 different positions. That's what they're doing. And currently, they're accepting paper applications, retyping the most important information into an Excel doc, and emailing that to the managers. That's how they're getting it done. Second example, a marketing team. That's who. They're going to build a new workspace or a new website for the company. And the way they're doing that now is by keeping track of emails and hour-long meetings daily to make sure everyone's on task. So keep this process in mind as we go through setting up the automation, whatever it is that you've thought of. When I look at a process and try to automate it, the two things that I'm looking for right off the bat are notifications and redundancy of work. Here are the first 4 steps of my process as it exists in Central Desktop today for maybe that marketing team. Let's stick with that example. A project request form is downloaded, filled out, re-uploaded, and emailed back to the PM. PM logs into Central Desktop, creates a new workspace, drops in the task list templates, and starts a discussion to alert the team that the project's now open. It's a pretty typical process for a lot of people. But the 2 items highlighted in blue start to get at notifications and redundancy of work. There's a few emails going around. I'm having to drop in task lists that I've already created in the system. So these 2 areas highlighted in blue will be the focus of the presentation today and the ones that I'm going to automate. So how do I do this? 5-step process. I go ahead and I define my roles. That is the very first thing we need to do. Again, who is doing the work? We need to get that into the system. We're going to define it by basic function. Project managers, account managers, whatever that looks like. Second is that we build our task list templates. We do this second because we're going to assign the roles to the task list templates, which further automates that project process. Define the workspace properties. This is the details, as you remember. We're then going to build the workflow rules. This has to come after workspace properties because, again, workspace properties end up being the triggers for those workflow rules. And that's kind of illustrated there that it goes back into pulling on your task list templates and working with the workspace properties. And then finally, we create the workspace template. That's the last thing we do. This is the container for everything we've already built. We'll assign the roles to the workspace template. We'll design the workspace template to make sure that it goes along with our workflow. Okay, so we're going to jump into this, and I'm going to be switching between a slide about best practices for each of the 5 steps I've talked about and an actual demonstration of the system. Caitlin is in the back helping me out with that, so if it doesn't go well, we know who to blame. Okay, so roles. The way that it works in our system is that we've got to create a bank of roles at the company level and pull those roles into workspaces as needed per project. Because of this, sometimes we see a little bit of redundancy in roles. Under project type A, you see project manager 1 and 2. This is perfectly fine. It works just great. However, in the thick of a project, I've found that this gets kind of confusing for some people, which one was PM1, which one was PM2. So my suggestion to you is to either use project type B or C. Let's better define who our project managers are. Are they print or digital, or are we just going to do this by lead and assistant? It'll help the organization of the project later on. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in the system. Awesome. It's going well so far. Thank you, Caitlin. So we are under the company setup area, and we're going to do most of our work in company setup today. We're under the groups and roles tab, and then we're under the roles tab itself. Those are under separate ones. So I've already got a bunch of these built. Account manager, assistant copywriter, whatever it looks like in your organization, we need to define these people. Creating a new role is as simple as clicking on new role, typing that in. That's awesome. And then you can go ahead and give a description to that as well. Great. So now we've got our roles created. We're ready to assign these to task list templates. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Oh, we already saw the roles. Sorry about that. Okay, task list templates. There's 2 key things that you need to look at when you're thinking about how do I want to build a task list template. The first is the type of template. So I put 3 examples up here of types of templates that I tend to suggest for people to use. The first is phases. This could mean that I need multiple task lists to finish a project. Let's go back to that marketing example. We're building a website. Maybe I build in 3 task list templates. One's a kickoff phase, another's a production phase, and then we have a launch phase. So that's 3 different task list templates I'm going to build for one project. The second one is by project type. Maybe it's a little more simple than that. We can build a single task list just for a website project and dump all those tasks into one. The third type, seen a little less commonly, but I don't think people think to use the system this way. What if I have a monthly billing process that I go through, and I want to create a task list called monthly billing? Those are 5 tasks that I am probably going to get done really quickly, but if I have my steps defined for me, I can now do reporting on that if I'm dropping it in every month, and I can make sure I'm not missing any steps or any clients in that process. So the timing would be monthly, quarterly, weekly, whatever it is that you guys do, we can template that. The second part of this is the level of automation. So we do have the ability to template relative start dates and due dates. But I would challenge you to really think about your process. Do I need relative start and due dates? In one of my projects, maybe I know it happens every single time where task 1 takes 1 day, task 2 takes 3 days, and then I move on to task 3, 4, 5. But there's other projects, because life happens and life changes, where I know that I'm going to kick a project off and I have to wait for client approval, I have to wait for so-and-so who's on maternity leave, whatever that looks like. Maybe we don't need to template relative start and due dates. Just templating the task themselves, assigning a role, and creating dependencies, which I'm going to get to in a second, could be enough for your team. Don't let the automation get in the way of the work that they need to do. So then finally, dependencies. Do we need these? Do we not? Dependencies are great. It helps you shift your entire project plan quickly. But maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe each of my tasks move independently from each other, and I need to keep that in mind so that I don't set up dependencies and then confuse my team when they shift something and everything moves. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Awesome, so we're going to navigate over to the Templates tab, and the first thing we land on is task list templates. I have 5 different templates set up here, representative of the phases that we just talked about. We've got 3 phases for a website project: kickoff, production, and launch, that monthly or timing type of task list, and then my website task list, which is what we'll start with. So in here, this is my entire process for creating a new website. I'm going to go ahead and have Caitlin click into the top task here. We've chosen to do a full set of automation on this task list. I've got my title, I have my roles, assistant designer and lead designer, assigned to this, and I have a relative start and duration. Every time we build a website, it takes us about 10 days to do this task. I feel comfortable templating that. And then finally, dependency, we also have those dependencies set up because one task has to happen right after the other in this process, so I want to make sure I've got that set up. Perfect. Let's go ahead and go back to all the templates here and take a look at, yes, the kickoff. Thank you. So in my other approach, I have a phased approach. I've got 3 different task lists that need to happen one after the other. Production's not going to start before kickoff. Launch obviously doesn't happen before production. In here, my kickoff process, again, pretty standard. I feel comfortable templating this. But if we go back to phase 2, you'll see that I've left a lot of this blank. Production gets a little hairy. I don't want to put relative start and due dates in there. I want my team to define that for themselves as this gets kicked off. If you could do me one quick favor and go in and edit one of those tasks, you will see that I have chosen to automate a couple other things: the role assignments and dependencies. So you have some flexibility there. Perfect. And if we, oh, look at that, I didn't have to say anything. Cool, so we're moving on to Workspace Properties. We did our roles, we did our task lists, and now we're looking at the details of the project, Workspace Properties. We have 2 main functions in here. I mentioned it before: reporting and triggers. With reporting, this is 100% going to be completely up to your process, what your managers need, what your team needs as far as reporting. But these 7 points are the ones that I always suggest people use when using our system for project management. Title, we need to know what the project is. Job number, if you use job numbers. Status of a project, so that could be open, in progress, on hold, canceled. We got to know what's going on. Risk. A lot of people will just do a drop down of high, medium, low. What's going on with this? A summary field, what this project is. The team, which we actually don't need to build into a workspace property because that's handled with our roles. And then project start and end dates. The triggers are much easier to explain once we're in the system. But before we do that, I do want to define the 3 things that we want this to do. So if you remember from the beginning, I talked about the fact that I wanted to cut down on emails that people had to send and redundancy of work. In order to do this, I'm going to want my system to automatically kick off my task list for me, automatically send out a few emails, and I'm going to have it update that status field as I go through the project to make sure that it's always properly tracked. So let's take a look at that. Perfect. So we'll go over to the Custom Fields tab. This is where the Workspace Properties are located. I have a couple different forms set up. So we do have the capability to set up multiple different project forms, so different sets of Workspace Property fields if your projects are different from one another. We'll look at the website one to stick with our theme. I've got my 7 data points we talked about in here: project title, job number, start and end date, all of that. And then down under project status, this is where the majority of my trigger fields are: status, risk, and then project type is actually one of them as well. I'm going to go back to the Workspace Properties tab and take a look at that edit field so I can show you what I did with these actual fields. So project status, just like we talked about, open, closed, on hold, canceled. I'm going to want a notification to go out whenever my team touches this field. It's going to start out as open, but if it goes on hold and nobody knows, what's the point? So I'm going to go ahead and build a workflow rule that makes sure that an email is sent out to everyone automatically when that on hold is selected, or for that matter, closed, canceled, whatever else is in there. Project type. I've got different forms. I've created them. I have one for that HR position, for a print project, for website. I need to make sure that my team is defining what kind of project this is so that we know what kinds of workflow rules we're kicking off, what task lists are getting dropped in. So I need to define that. This is another trigger field. And then this project phase field is going to get interesting when we jump into workflow because it's talking about those 3 phases that I built in my task list phase approach: kickoff, production, and launch. So we'll see how I use those in a moment here. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a second. Workflow rules in our system have to be built individually. Each action I want the system to take needs its own rule. For that reason, a lot of people can get overwhelmed opening this screen and taking a look at a list of workflow rules like this. It's very important to come up with a naming convention for your workflow rules. I personally always set people up with what the workflow rule is doing, so email notification, and then when it's happening, a new project is opened. When we move a little further down, it gets a little more complicated. You'll see I'm updating a field there on number 3 because the status is being set to on hold, and that is notifying the project team. So whatever your naming convention ends up being, just make sure you have one that's standard so that any admin that opens this page doesn't go, oh, forget it, I'm just not even going to bother. Let's go ahead and start with the first one. So this is eliminating the step of a project manager having to open a new discussion, subscribe the entire team to it, and then send that notification out. What I've done here is told the system, send an email notification when a workspace is created, and notify everyone. And I'm able to notify everybody because I can assign roles to workflow rules. And if I'm using roles and I'm defining who those people are when I open a workspace, they're going to get the email. Go ahead and head on back to the next screen, or the workflow rule screen, and look at the task list created. So this is the other part of my process where my PM had to open the workspace, drop in the appropriate task list templates. Well, when I define a single task list website for my website project, I can easily tell my system, create a task list when a workspace is created, and my project type is website. That's where that project type field comes in. And additionally, sorry, Caitlin, I just threw you off. Can you scroll down to the bottom again? When I'm actually building those templates and I put in relative start and due dates, I can indicate a start date right here too. So if I want that task list to start the day that I open the workspace, I can do that. If I want to open the workspace, give my team a little time, this project isn't starting till a week out or the next day, I can select that as well and have it populate those dates for me. Awesome. All right, so this is the other one we talked about. My status of my project moves. I need to let my team know. Email notification. The difference here, when a workspace is modified. So the workspace has already been created, but if I go in and I update that status field, it's going to now trigger when project status is on hold, please email these people. Now, we could simplify this a little bit because you're thinking, well, now I got to create a workflow rule for every single project status. You could just say, when the project status is empty or when it's changed, you can send a workflow rule out to everyone. And as Caitlin stayed on the screen reminding me, we do have the ability to customize those notifications. We can pull in different fields from other workspace properties. On this one in particular, I have indicated that I would like project status notes as a field to be pulled into this notification. So not only did my status change, but I had my PM go ahead and say, this is on hold because the client's not getting back to me. And that goes out directly in the email, everyone knows, and they can move on to other things. Perfect. All right, task list created website project phase 1. This is my favorite workflow rule, that's new. So we have the ability to kick off those task list templates. But what if I don't want to do it all at once? I want to do it one phase at a time. I can start here and I can say task list creation when workspace is created, project type is website. We already went through all of that. And then down at the bottom, I'm kicking off my kickoff task list. And I'm pulling on that kickoff website. This part's standard. If I go to my next workflow rule, I'm doing a field update, when a task list is completed. So once a task list is completed and I define what that is, it's my O1 kickoff, I'm going to have it move my project phase straight to production. So two things are going to happen with this. When we look at the next workflow rule, it's actually going to kick off my second task list because that field is now production. But it's also already updated my project status for me, and when I pull a report, I know exactly where that project is. And my team didn't have to do a thing. Great, so this is phase 2. So the task list has now been created because the workspace was modified by the previous workflow rule, and the project phase is now production. So this can go on forever. We can do the next phase with task list 3 and 4 and 5, and it gives your team the flexibility to take their time on some of these things. So not that we're necessarily wanting to do that, but if I have a phase that takes a little bit longer, production didn't get done in time, the next task list doesn't have to be shifted out manually because it doesn't exist yet. As soon as we finish production, it'll kick that off, and then we can start working through those dates. Awesome. So the one other thing that I wanted to mention, we talked about this on a very early slide, is the ability to create file workflow rules too. Anywhere in our system that we have workflow, which is at the company level, the file level, and then databases, you're going to see pretty similar workflow engine screen. We've been looking through all of these screens. For file workflows, I'm going to mainly be sending emails. Under the Apply To section, I can decide when these emails are going out based on whether or not it's in a particular folder. So maybe I have a different file approval process for contracts from 5K to 10K or under 5K or whatever that looks like. I can select one of those folders and say when a file is modified and the status is moved to manager approval or pending approval, send out a notification to the next person in line. Thanks, Caitlin. I'm totally throwing this at her ad hoc. So my file is pending approval, and it's in my contracts folder, and then I can go ahead and say, all right, the manager on that project is Lauren, and I need her to get this email notification to go in and approve this file. Awesome. I think we are ready to go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. So the final portion of this is Workspace Templates. Now we've set up all the automation, we've got to tie this all together. We got to make it happen. There are 3 things that you need to remember when putting together a Workspace template. Your folder structure is something that we can automate and template, the home page design, and the tabs. On top of that, we also logistically need to assign your roles and forms to the template, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Folder structure, naming convention. This is another area where naming convention is really important. In our system, as you guys have already seen with some of the task list things, everything's alphanumeric. So if you want your folders in a certain order, let's make sure we throw a number in front of them. We also want to make sure that it makes sense for everybody. Different teams, as you're starting to automate your processes, are going to call it a brief or a project start or something like that. So get the teams together, decide what that's going to be, make sure it's all one naming convention. The 3 deep rule. People are going to get annoyed if they have to click 5, 6 folders deep into a folder structure. They're going to give up, they're going to put the file wherever they want, and nobody's going to know where it is. So I always say 3 folders deep is the way to go, no further than that. Homepage design. This is actually pulling from Caitlin's presentation last year at Collabosphere. There have been studies done that say that when people look at a screen, they're first looking down the left third of the screen and then across the top third. So whenever you're designing a homepage, make sure you're putting what you want your team to see first and foremost and what's important to them in those regions of the homepage. And then finally, tabs. This one's pretty simple. Less is more. I know that we have a ton of options in CD. Going in there and turning on every single tab may look really cool because it's all the bells and whistles. But if your team doesn't need it, it's tab overload. They, again, don't know where to go. They don't know where to click or where to put something, and they're going to give up. So keep it simple. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Great, so awesome. Now we are on the templates tab one more time, but instead of task list, we've moved over to Workspace. And you can see that I can have multiple Workspace templates set up, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that website one. When I first click in to edit a template from that page, it takes me to settings. And under configuration options, this is the first kind of technical piece of tying all the automation together. I have the ability to decide what form I want to be associated to this workspace. So we created a website form with my project details that I need. I want to make sure I associate it to the right template. Next thing is the roles. We also have to decide what roles we want to pull into this workspace. So I can go in, use my little magnifying glass, select my role. I can add all of them, some of them, whatever works for this project. And then always make sure you hit update. I don't know how many times I do that. Just hit update. Quick little tip on that one. And then go head over to the home page. Actually, you know what, Caitlin? I'm really sorry. Let's do the Properties tab really quickly. Great. So under your Properties tab, this is the form that we associated. This is what we're going to use every time a project is kicked off. One more quick element of automation. If you want, instead of your team having to pick the project type when they're opening this, we can template it here because we've associated it to a specific website template. So just one less step. This, if you remember, is what triggers all of our task lists. No brainer. It'll already be in there when they open the workspace. And then finally, the home page. Using my left third and top third, I have my project folders listed, any upcoming tasks, and the people that are a part of this project. And I've kept my tabs very simple. So as an admin, of course, I'm seeing settings, people, and properties, so I could demo that for you today. But my team is going to go in, and they're going to see home, files and discussions, and project management. That's all we need. Awesome. Great. So one more time, just to reiterate this entire process. These are the 5 things we need to do. And you can do them in a different order. I wouldn't recommend it. It gets very confusing, especially the first 3 steps. Roles first, task list templates so you can assign them to the task list templates, and Workspace Properties third. And I always say that third because it's the furthest back in the configuration process that we can put this so that we make sure that we have taken the time to evaluate your process up into that point. If I don't know what I want to report on, if I don't know the who, the what, or the how, I'm not going to be able to build those property fields. So as a wrap-up, this is one of my favorite Bill Gates quotes, but the first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify efficiency, and then vice versa on the other side. The second is that automation applied to an inefficient process will magnify inefficiencies. So please, please look at your process, take a look at what you're doing, look for those redundancies, and then go in and automate it within Central Desktop. Awesome, so thank you very much, and I do have time for questions if people have them. Oh boy, okay.
Question: when you're setting up or you have a group of project managers, is the system admin the only person that can go into the company setup, or do you have your team of project managers set up as admins to then go in and customize, say, by their client or whomever they're working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the only people that have access to company setup are company admins. You can indicate multiple company admins. But yeah, that would be a little bit separate from that. So I would say work with your PMs if you don't want them to have that access to build what they need, and then they can implement it. Yeah.
Some of our roles are standard about 80% of the time, but because we have a small team, we kind of cover as second for a lot of other roles as well.
Yeah.
So how do we maintain automation most of the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple different ways that you can do that. If you know what those roles are, even though they may not necessarily be pulled in on a regular basis, you can always add a role to a workspace later on. So I find out halfway through a project, oh wait, I'm actually gonna need this person, and pull them in. We can do that. Or you don't have to use roles. We can use it for, like you said, 80% of the project. And then when I get to tasks where I'm adding them ad hoc, I can go ahead and add in just a member rather than that role itself. So all that stuff can be created on the fly if needed. Any other questions?
I had a question about
I'll answer that instead.
workspace properties.
Yes.
When you define your workspace properties, does that then apply to every single workspace? Or did I understand that you can actually have multiple forms that you can apply to certain workspaces through the workspace properties?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the workspace properties work a lot like the roles in the sense that when you create a field, you have a bank of fields then that you can pull from. And you then create forms where you can pull those fields in and associate them to different kinds of projects. Does that make sense? Perfect. We've got a question over here. I don't know where our mics are at.
You did minimal tabs to keep the workspace
Yes.
simple. But I know there's a task and milestones. Would you need something like that? Or is there some other way if you wanted to kind of get some dashboard reporting on this project? Where is it? You know, how far is it? Would that just mean other tabs you have to add to get that functionality?
For the report itself,
Yeah, or a way to kind of monitor the overall progress of the project and whether the tasks are being completed in a timely manner or not.
Yep, absolutely. So if you haven't played around with our reporting engine yet, it's really great. It's going to pull on two different areas. So it's going to pull a lot from project management. So if you have that tab turned on, you're assigning tasks and due dates and everything there, you'll be able to report on that. But on top of that, when I talk about those workspace properties, that's going to be the properties tab I showed towards the end there. And if you have data populated in there, you can pull that into reports with project management as well. Did that answer the question? Okay, great. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.